Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the November 2021 FMDiSC meeting. We've got some really great content today. We've got, Susan, who we're going to be talking with in just a second. We're also going to have a nice little break after Susan, a little breakout rooms, which we've been doing recently. We're going to do a quick, just probably about a 15-minute review of Pause on Error for those who were in attendance and have things to share. And then we're going to finish up with a really highly, a lot of street talk about the presentation of Pause on Error by Heidi Porter, Chris Moyer, and Wim de Court. So we're thrilled to have them as well. Right now, front and center, we've got Susan Fennema, who's a good friend and a welcome compadre to the FileMaker community. Just to give you some insights, she has labeled herself as the CEO or Chaos Eradicating Officer Beyond the Chaos. We're going to have a little chat. Susan and I are going to just kind of kick around and I'm going to just kind of ask her some questions. We're going to learn a little bit more about what she does and how she can help various people and how she got where she's at and so forth. So Susan, good morning.
Good morning.
Give us a little bit, before you ever touched anything in the FileMaker world, before you knew that such a thing existed, what's your background?
Well, surprisingly, in 1988, dating myself, when I graduated from college, the first company I worked for used FileMaker. And I actually used it to set up POs and invoices and that kind of thing. At that company, I was a desktop publisher, now known as a production artist, which is what graphic artists, that kind of thing. And then from there, I went on to companies with mail order catalog type work. I helped set up the whole process. So we started from designing the products all the way to photographing the products, getting them into the magazines or catalogs, printing them, and then distributing them. And I don't know if you're already hearing me talk in process form, right? So even way back there, I knew the steps. I was actually the keeper of those processes. What are all the steps we go through and how do you have to schedule that out to make those print deadlines? Back in those days, if you were printing a big catalog, it's probably still true today. If you didn't make the time on the press, you could get pushed off for weeks. So that was always the hard deadline. Moving from there, I went to Chicago and became the director of operations at an ad agency there. Worked there for 10 years. And essentially I managed fresh out of school project managers coming in to that environment. Advertising is tough, really tough. Deadlines are not flexible at all. There is no understanding when something is met. It is hard-nosed. The people are not always nice. So really learned how to manage a lot of personalities there. And I was responsible for pulling that whole community or company together. They were working in total silos. And guess what we did? We called Molly Connolly, and she brought in a FileMaker solution for that agency. And Molly and I worked together for about 10 years, honing that and improving that tool. Until I left there, I decided I wanted to come back home to Texas. Molly actually helped me with that. She helped me find Mighty Data, who needed a project manager, operations person to help out. So I jumped into that role for 6 years and then off and running on my own.
That's really, one of the things I always find interesting, I think whether you're a database, designer, I think we all many of us see things in rows and columns and we like to organize and so forth. But from a world of operations, I think, you can't do what you do without having a penchant for wanting things to be orderly. And we see that going back in many of us, going back decades, right? Like, oh, as a kid, I used to organize my Legos by color or by size. We see those things, right, in ourselves back in the early days that lead to our careers
Do you know my buttons story?
No.
Okay, so I actually asked my mom for these buttons so that I could remind myself and keep them on my desk. Way when I was 3 or 4 years old, my mom was a seamstress. She sewed,
Mm-hmm.
and to keep me busy, she would dump the buttons out on the floor for me to play with. Well, I was organizing them by color and by size and building little graphs out of them at 4 years old. So there's
Wow.
just something in me that makes me do that. I'm sure
It's
it's in you guys too.
it's a defect, right?
Yeah.
That's what it is. So you all of a sudden you're flirting with FileMaker solutions like many of our customers do, a lot of our clients, and we all touch it. That's, half the people that I know professionally that aren't FileMaker developers have touched it, or used it and so forth.
Mhm.
But from all of a sudden you're in Texas and you're working with Kurt Bowman, you're working with Martha Zink, you're working with a number of people that many of us know, and you're immersed in this whole, not just I'm helping in an operational standpoint, but I'm part of this bigger little ecosystem, this community of people and so forth. How is that?
For sure. I'd never experienced anything like it. The first year I went to DevCon, I was walking down the hall with Kirk and Molly and Martha. And I had no idea that I was walking with FileMaker rock stars.
Right.
And I'm walking down the hall and people are actually stopping and they're like, oh, that was Martha. Oh, did you see Molly? Those kinds of things that I was like, what is going on here?
I've just joined Aerosmith and I didn't know it.
I'm like, who knew that this was a thing? And so I give a lot of credit to Kirk for talking me up in the community, getting me involved and known in the community. And man, I love it. That's why I keep going back to DevCon, even though I'm not working in a FileMaker shop anymore.
Yeah, we see, it's funny, we see a lot of people in the FileMaker space that are developers and, plugin manufacturers, things that are directly related. But even for those of us who've been around long enough, we see a lot of people who have left and their primary focus is another facet of business or what have you. And they miss or they try to maintain that link to the community just because there's such great energy and such great camaraderie in there and so forth too. And then as you have progressed, let's not talk about beyond the chaos yet, because we're gonna, but as you progressed in the FileMaker community, you next thing you know, you're boothing. I remember seeing you and Martha holding down the booth a number of times at DevCons and so forth. And then all of a sudden, things like Women of FileMaker, women innovating together, and all of a sudden, and then pause on errors are happening and so forth. And all of a sudden, this woman, Susan over here, is starting to kind of float to the top with a lot of the other sort of leaders in the community in certain areas. So how did that feel?
Well, I have a problem of any organization I'm a member of. I can't just be a member. I always end up leading something. And when Molly asked me if I wanted to take over Women of FileMaker, I thought this was a great opportunity to really grow it into something more. She had set the idea of let's do some scholarships. Let's make this a real nonprofit. Well, when I got in and I started saying, okay, where's all the money? And, somebody's got some in their bank account. Somebody's got some in their bank account. I'm like, okay, I don't think this is going to work. We need to become a real nonprofit. And so my contribution was naming it something that could be incorporated. We could not use FileMaker in a corporate name. And we asked and they said no, and I get it. It makes sense to me too. I wouldn't have wanted my name used in somebody else's company name either. That's why we went with Women Innovating Together, and we were able to actually get a checking account and do some things like that have started to make it a real organization with an official structure as opposed to just being Women Who Lunch. And I give a huge shout out to Molly for starting down the path of going beyond just Women Who Lunch into a greater good for the community.
Yeah, I mean, if nothing else, one of the old dogs here of going to DevCons over the years. And by the way, kudos to Barb Levine, one of my dear friends here, who was one of the early proponents of let's get the women together. And I think some of those early lunches and so forth, where you could count the members on a couple of hands, and now there's like this whole wave of just incredibly strong and capable women in our community. I think we've really seen this thing going from this tiny little speck inside this greater community to like, no, number one, it's big. Number two, it's strong. And number three, it's growing. I think it's been really a good testament to you guys organizing and help bringing some structure and just visibility to what you guys are doing and how you work. And then obviously putting really good agenda items, bringing people to the conference and what you guys focus on. Those are really great items as well.
Well, and the other beauty of the organization is giving women the opportunity to lead something. That's why I'm no longer the president of it, or we call it lead facilitator, but we wanted to make sure that continues to pass to other people who have the opportunity to grow it and learn, because you're learning more than basic FileMaker stuff. When you're doing that, you're learning how to lead and grow things and some business acumen that you might not get otherwise.
Right. So that's sort of your path through through the verticalness of going through the FileMaker community, but halfway along, at some point along the way, working within a FileMaker team was like, okay, I'm taking a different path, and you started Beyond the Chaos. Tell us what the germ or the genesis of that was and how it had continued to kind of spawn.
So Beyond the Chaos was a brand that I had for several years before I started pointing it towards business. In fact, back in 2008, when I was working for the ad agency, I was thinking, okay, I'm going to get laid off like everyone. Sadly, they did not lay me off. They just kept giving me more and more work for the same pay. But when I got laid off, my whole plan was, okay, here's a brand I'm going to take from cleaning out rich ladies' closets, which is essentially what I was doing with it. I was a personal organizer type thing. And I was going to switch it to business. I'm like, this applies to business. I've always worked for small business owners, one at a time, helping them do what I do right now, which is simplify those operations, build a structure, get the owner out of the day-to-day. And so when it came time, when Kirk was moving on to Art of Value and those types of things, when it came time for me to exit, I'm like, I looked for a job and I'm like, I hate everything. This all sounds awful. And now I also have this beauty of working in a virtual world, which I did not have the experience up until then. And I just could not dream of going to an office and sitting behind a desk and earning people's trust again and all of that. And so I said, let's take this to the masses. Let's stop working for one business owner at a time. Let's work for a lot of them. So there we go. Jumped into this.
Yeah. And you talk about, I like the verbiage, obviously, Chaos Eradicating Officer and so forth. But one of the things that you kind of describe about what you do, which I think is interesting, number one, I want to ask you, let's clarify what you see as operations, just to remind those of us who are like, okay, where does that start and stop within an organization? But you talk about fractional COO, right? You're not just saying, hey, let me come in and run your shop. You're talking about a sort of a hybrid model for how and where you fit into operations. So again, tell me about operations. Tell me about this fractional COO vision you have.
So operations is what makes your company go. Not finances, not marketing, but that process of from the first time you touch a client, what are all the steps to the last time you get a great review or a great testimonial from your client? What are the steps through that process? What are your sales steps? What is your transition? What is your fulfillment? And what is your offboarding? It can also include how you're running things with your team. How do you onboard your team? How do you train them? How do you make sure you have enough people? How do you make sure they're allocated properly? So it's really all those little details that most small business owners just really hate to do. And it's managing all of that, and that's operations, right?
It's really, I mean, one of the things that I always sort of feel, which I think you'll probably agree with, is, a lot of the times operation factors in with the planning, but, the CEO is the visionary. We're going in this direction. How are we going to get there? The execution is great. Operations are going to make this vision happen, right?
Yep. Make it happen is always something that I have in my vocabulary of love the idea, but unless we make a plan of how to make it happen, it's just a dream.
Yeah.
Right. So let's put into action what to do to make that happen. I'm not a great visionary. I think working for visionaries and making their visions come true is where my area of expertise comes into play. And also taking the compassion and understanding of the small business owner and what kind of world they live in, what their responsibilities are, and how it can impact their family, friends, coworkers, team, vendors, clients, and changing that approach, lightening their load so that they can change the way that they're interacting. I take that on as well. I feel that that's an important part of what Beyond the Chaos offers that, some others might not get involved in.
Yeah, there's an art to grabbing what's on the whiteboard of the chief, and being able to go, great, what do we need to do to execute that? How do we break that into digestible actions? Who do we delegate those to? A lot of that, it sounds like, notwithstanding the fact that I think you help spot this is going to be a problem and this is going to be some of that as well, right?
Yeah, okay, so you want to quadruple your revenue over the next 2 years, but you don't have enough people and you're already got all your clients mad at you because you can't fulfill what you have. Maybe that's not that realistic. Let's take that back a step and let's make sure that the people we're working for now are happy first. And then let's figure out how to scale that. So there's a lot of considering the scalability for the future involved as well.
I think, in my career as a software developer, I started with whatever the boss wants, give it to them. And I think as we get a little more mature, we get a little more experience, there's a certain amount of responsibility to say, what are you trying to do? Let's see. And if your stated plan has holes in it or is flawed, to have the wherewithal to be able to push back and say, hey, like you just gave an example, hey, your existing customers are not happy. Let's not talk about growth yet.
Yeah.
But let's see if we can get to that. So there's a certain amount of pushback that has to happen as you guide, business leaders who are used to being the smart guy or gal in the room. And all of a sudden you got to go, this is great, but here's what I'm seeing. And here's some things that we might want to help you modify to get you there.
We say a lot of hard truths as gently as we can. And right. I'll tell you, that skill set is important for everyone in this meeting. You're working with clients who are going to ask you for something and you'll be like, oh, I know how to fix that. I know how to solve that. And you go in and do it. And all of a sudden you find out, oh, it wasn't worth that many hours or that much money to them to do that. That was just their off the cuff question. And so if you're not thinking through, how does this affect the whole picture? It's a big thing. So developers need to look at that too, and saying the hard things. It's really our responsibility as professionals to share that with people who don't know better.
Right.
So the fractional thing, I didn't answer your second.
Yeah, no, please.
So fractional C-level employees have become a huge rage these days. You've probably heard of it more in the finance area. CFOs coming in, they might work for you for half a day, take care of all your financial issues, and then they're out until next week or next month or whatever. It's the same concept for fractional COOs. So companies that cannot reasonably afford, or that I would never recommend, to bring a full-time experienced operations officer on board, can get the expertise of these fractional C-level employees, so to speak, in an affordable way. So instead of spending 200,000 plus per year, you're looking at a fraction of the money, and all you need is a fraction of the expertise, really. Quite honestly, many of the companies I work with, I could push and push and push until you're exhausted. You know, if I was an employee there. So phasing our work down so that it's less is good for you, it's good for us, and it gives those businesses an ability to grow in those areas that they would have not ever thought possible before.
Right. When you, as a, you know, again, most of us are software shops, we see similar circumstances frequently when we're sitting with customers. Oh, they're re-entering data twice into multiple systems, or they don't have the ability to run reports. We see these things. They don't have a mobile component to their workflow and so forth. So we always kind of see these things that happen over and over. What are the things in your business when you're doing this eval of an organization and so forth, and you go, oh, my top things that I always see at many of the small businesses that we work with, these are the things that, you know, is it delegation, is it planning, is it execution? What are the things that you broadly see across many of the businesses that you tangle with?
Well, you named three already.
Oh, look at me.
Three.
I could work for you.
Right. Thanks. We're done. No, there's also a feeling that you have to tackle of the small business owner. And we work with companies up to 25 people. So the business owner is very involved in the business, but the lack of willingness of the small business owner to let go because they don't trust what's going to happen. And part of that is because they've had their fingers in everything. They're doing everything. They might have a process for it, but it's in their head. It's not something that they could share with someone else. When they hire team members, they struggle with being able to bring them up to speed and sharing the expectations clearly. So a lot of those team members will either fail because in the business owner's mind, they didn't do what they were supposed to do, but the team member is going, I don't know what I'm supposed to do, you know? So we see a lot of that. That's another symptom. We also will see where the owner and the team is just reacting to the squeakiest wheel. So there's no planning of, we're going to do this on this day. That means, and this on that day. And that means we can't take a new client for 2 weeks or 2 months if you're really busy. But there's a little bit of suffering under that weight of success where it kind of gets out of control and you don't know what's next until somebody yells at you because it's not done. Right. So we see a lot of that. And then sometimes in some companies, we just did this with a marketing advertising firm who works in the financial world. They had so much success so quickly, and they had hired great team members. So all the team members are handling their area, but nobody knows what's going on. Right? Everybody's handling it differently. There's no way to a common process running throughout. They've all just figured it out. That gets you scaled to a certain place, but then you're stopped again.
Right.
Yeah. So lack of software is another one. We have a lot of situations where people don't use any project management software. And another example of that, I hear this a lot. Well, I tried Asana and Basecamp and Trello, but none of them worked. Okay, well, it's probably the process around how you're using it, not the tool, because any of those tools will work, as will Teamwork, as will ClickUp. Whatever you pick will work. You just got to have the process. You can't put a hammer next to a nail and pray that the picture gets hung on the right wall at the right level. You have to put a little bit of of process around the tools.
Right. You you allude to something that, again, I think we're organizing data, and we are, as software developers, we're often, I got to build a screen, and what's the implication of this screen? Well, the user's trying to do X, Y, and Z, and therefore we want to build a workflow that pulls these tasks together and so forth. I think a lot of what you do has some similarities, but one of the things you spoke to, which resonates with me, is that sort of siloed or tribal knowledge. Oh, Madge has been at the company for 40 years and she does this one thing one way and nobody else understands how or where it works. You talked about hiring people who maybe can do their tasks, but don't understand how it all flows together into the greater good and how it all fits the vision of where the company is going. So it sounds like you see a lot of that as well.
We see a lot of that. Another thing that we see is owners feeling like they can't hold their team accountable for things.
Interesting.
There's no way to say you did that wrong because there's no process. There's no written expectation of what it's supposed to be. That's part of what we do, is we train on the process. And once that process is trained, now you can manage to the process. So
Right.
Someone messes something up, you say, how did our process go wrong? And now you and the team member are working together to improve the process instead of butting heads and being at odds.
Right.
And it not only makes that leadership better, it makes your process better. Now, you're still going to run into some people who are like, oh yeah, I didn't even look at that. Well, now you have an accountability problem and you can hold them accountable to that and then manage the person.
Yeah, that's an interesting approach, because there are times when you want to take the emotion out of the situation. A perfect example of that, just a sort of a metaphor. You sit down with a customer, you tell them, I'm going to build you this system, it's going to cost this much. There's really broad expectations on both sides. I'm going to make this money. I'm going to get the software I need. But if you write it down, if you establish, here's the design spec, here's the contract, here's when it's going to be delivered and so forth. Now you have a written thing that you can say, hey, the software design document said it was going to do X, Y, and Z. It only does X, Y, it doesn't do Z. You're not mad at the person. You're holding everybody accountable to this plan, right? This agreement. Your point that you just made strikes me as this process is what we're trying to achieve, and if we get off of it, it is the document that we can be frustrated at, but not necessarily the
Right.
people. And if the document needs to be adjusted or modified, that can happen, right? But you're not anchoring these intentions back and forth at people. You're using something much more objective.
Well, and it gives you a framework to grow in too, because maybe this person has run into something that you haven't thought of before, because your business hasn't taken that next step or worked with that type of client. And it gives you an ability to evolve. I mean, your processes grow and evolve with you. You don't write them once and then forget them. That's a waste of money. Don't do that, by the way. That's a bad waste of money. Yeah. They have to grow and evolve with you and the company, and as your software changes and all of that. And it shouldn't be a weight on you as a small business owner, right? We like to be flexible and do what we want and all that kind of thing. And so I have to say, I did this yesterday. It was perfect. I'm like, oh, I'm going to send this proposal out to this new client. Yeah, I don't know how to do that anymore. I have a team member who knows exactly what to do. I would have to go look up the process and follow the steps to do it correctly. It's there if I need it. It's there if the team member goes. But having that ability just to say, no, part of me not knowing is that it's not my job. I've got to let that go. So that process can evolve as she comes up against something where she's like, ooh, am I supposed to copy somebody on this? Oh, okay. Great question. Maybe that needs to go into the process document of how you find that out. So you can evolve and grow as you change.
Right. As you start to execute, one of the things that we've done some at Angel City, we've done some personality evaluations at times and some of these types of things. Obviously, I would imagine within you're sitting down, you're working with a group of 15 people at a small business. You're probably looking at, what is the CEO, what kind of personality, what type of, what do we see in terms of him? Who are the people surrounding him that are going to be, I'm going to pull into the equation and help instill them some of these processes, some of these operational plans and so forth. You look for certain kinds of people within an organization like that?
Absolutely. A perfect example, we've been working with the Scarpetta Group for a long time. They're a longtime client. And Joe is definitely a visionary. He does not love the details. So we've been handling the details up until he hired Beth Murillo as his new developer. That's what she came in as. But I identified very quickly, this is a process-oriented person. This is a detail-oriented person. I could tell from the questions she was asking me. And so Joe and I were able to work it out where we were able to hand that off to her, and she is now able to do the project management, and they have that in-house. So when you can find those people in-house that are going to be good executors, you always want to empower that, because they're going to take more ownership and they're going to be there day to day, and it's great.
Yeah, there's a great fit. I have that sort of person. For me, Angela in our office is she's my right hand. She takes the dribble that comes out of my mouth and, okay, this means we need to talk to the accounting people, or this is what our developers need to do, or our project managers need to do that. Having that person who can be very supportive and a bit more structured and organized can just really help implement a lot of those things in a much faster way than you can get to yourself sometimes.
Totally will change your world if you have that person. Totally.
Yeah. When you are, I hear you talk about, you've mentioned project management, in working with you, I know also your penchant for different tools, communication styles and so forth. So what are some of those things on the wheel that you'll bring to an organization? We're going to look at utilization, or we're going to look at time entry, or we're going to look at how we communicate, when we communicate, what methodologies we use. What are the things that you find yourself doing, in terms of what you're executing within an organization?
I think one of the first things, we always do a discovery process, because everybody has a little bit of a different problem. Mm-hmm. Some might be using their tool well, but everybody's using it differently. And so streamlining that into one method and training that is one. Some people have outgrown their tool. Maybe they were using Trello because it was free, and now they need more. And so we will advise on what tools to move to. We recommend Teamwork, by the way. It's an awesome tool. And you're able then to help them and train them on that tool, help them actually pull the projects that they have in there, create some templates. So we're actually doing the physical work there for them.
Right.
So that it's not overloaded. The other things that we look for is on the level of are all the team members on the same page? Do they understand what their jobs are? If you ask one person and get an answer, and then another person, you get a different answer, okay, there's something that's not being communicated well. So what's the truth? And then how do we disperse that?
How do you, on that particular point, Susan, if you, let's just say you're talking with, again, within our community, you're a developer, you're a project manager, and you should be doing A, B, and C. And when I ask you, you seem to be doing B and C, but not even aware that A is on your, how do you instill that, not just go, hey, you're doing it wrong, but how do you instill that you keep that from happening again? Right.
So there's your accountability. So first, is the process clear to everyone? Okay, let's take an example here. John Sindelar's method of recording everything before you deliver it, make a little movie, right?
Right.
And the number of developers who have ended their movie with a curse word and stopped and had to fix it, right? That's part of quality control, and it's part of training a client. Some team members do it great. They love it. That's their method of testing their work. They love that it's perfect. Others are going so fast that they skip that part and just tell the client it's ready. Let's say that that's happening in an organization. Okay, how do you handle that? Well, one team member is moving faster than the other one. They're able to accomplish more because they don't have to back up and redo. The other team member is struggling often to manage their workload because they're interrupted nonstop with things that didn't work. So teaching to that point of, hey, did you actually make the video? Okay, that's going to help you with all of this. You have to identify the problem in the moment as opposed to lecture from above, right? I can tell you to make that video until the cows come home. But if you don't want to do it, I have to wait until you're in your pain point to say, do you see now how that could have solved the problem? Just like kids, right? Don't touch the stove until they touch the stove.
Yeah.
It's the same kind of thing. The other is that, when you're a project manager, when you're working in that realm, you're not the boss of everyone, right? You're the coordinator of everyone. And so you have to adjust your style to be different to the different people, depending on what they need and what they need to hear. But the other is you have to know when to get the owner or the boss involved to say, this person can't or won't do this. And we either need to invest in some training or you need to consider a replacement. And that's a hard conversation too.
Yeah, one of the things when we are, I as software developers, I often consider us agents of change. We're coming in to change your process and hopefully improve it and make things better. Getting that the very first thing is to get broad stroke senior level buy-in. The decision maker, yes, we're going to do this and it's going to be great because of these 4 or 5 things that Dave and his team are telling us. That's big. And then it allows me, to walk within the organization and go, what are you doing over here? Oh, I'm doing X, Y, and Z. Well, the boss, his goals are to do X, A, B, and C over here, and I'm not quite seeing that. So I like to sort of, let's see how we can get you in step with the boss. And then, of course, if you don't get that buy-in, if you're getting resistance from the golden rule is, what is the mission statement of what we're here to do, right? We're here to improve your processes or what have you. If you're not allowing us to do that, and this is what the boss is asking, sometimes you got to tap the boss on the shoulder to either, again, put the foot down. I think to your point on a worst case scenario, do we have to get this person out of the organization?
We've had some interesting experiences where we go into groups and somebody they love this employee. This employee hung the moon. Well, as you start to put accountability into place, that employee tends to be the one that's not doing any of it. And so, it doesn't matter how great you are at coding or how great you are at selling. If you cannot work within the organization's structure, you're not very useful.
Right.
And that's a hard thing to think through.
And you, again, a lot of these small businesses, everything's organic, everybody's focused on what's on their plate. One of the things that you were saying, reactive, I always find small businesses to be sort of playing defense a lot. And to use a football metaphor, they're blocking, they're keeping bad things are happening, and we're trying to block this and keep it from happening, as opposed to going, we need to get the ball and go down the field and score some points. And we can't get to that because we're playing so much defense on, being pummeled around by some of those things. But when you're talking about these people who can be blockers or potential issues, it would seem like you need do you use some sort of measurement, or is this just sort of, wow, I'm floating around in this organization, nobody looks at the things I'm seeing and I'm noticing this? Or do you guys actually track and tabulate things on that order?
We don't track or tabulate, although you can say, look, this person has 25 late tasks and all the clients are mad at them all their projects are the ones off the rails.
It's pretty simple.
You can point to those things.
Yeah.
You can also point to nobody else can get along with them.
Right.
Or in our case, a lot of the times, especially when we're working with software developers, we can't get a hold of them for 2 weeks. Not even could you respond and tell us you're too busy?
Right.
Those kinds of things. That's where it's easy to identify when you're more in the muck, so to speak, than you're, looking at a finished product or looking at, an interaction between people, just that top line.
Right. One of the, one of the things as a small business owner and, as the visionary for our company, we've got a number of people that help us with our vision, and we've got a great team. And I always try to exercise them to think, everybody should think a little bit as creatively as they can and so forth. But every once in a while, you've got 20 agenda items. Oh my God, we want to increase our marketing and be better at project management and all that. How do you whittle those down to, again, as database developers, same deal. Oh, we want to have a system that does these 40 things. Let's start with these 3 or 4 things. How do you triage, or how do you prioritize?
So we look at, it doesn't matter how much you sell. If you can't fulfill properly, it doesn't matter. Keep selling. All you got is mad people and giving people money back and all that kind of thing. So we start with the fulfillment process.
Nice.
Are you delivering what you said you would deliver when you said you were going to deliver it? That's really the starting point. And then we'll back out to the before and after parts. That part sometimes takes a lot of effort. And the other part of that is, in that fulfillment process, are all your clients having the same experience? Are you walking through it in a systemized way that could be scalable so that you could hire 5 more people and do 20 times the work? Is that set up that way? Or is it too convoluted or complex that you can't scale it? And so we look at that, and then we look at sales, now we're generated. This is working. Everybody knows what to do and how to execute it. Let's start working on that sales process so that you're not dropping leads, and you're making sure that your proposal gives the team the information it needs to execute properly.
Right.
And has all the information in it that is required. And then what is that handoff from sales to fulfillment? And is that smooth and clear? So always we start with the fulfillment and making sure that you're executing to the people that you've already won first.
Nice. That's really interesting that you started that fulfillment, and that you, number one, when I ask somebody about their business or their process, I like it when somebody responds quickly. Like, that's our DNA. When I asked you that question, you said fulfillment. Like, it wasn't even, well, sometimes we do this and something. It's like, are you getting the job done well? And you went right there, and that speaks a lot to your internal processes of how you attack a company issue and answer that one word, fulfillment. Is fulfillment happening as expected? That's fantastic. I like that. One of the things that strikes me, there are times, again, I keep pulling the parallels between what we do as software developers and you, because I see there being so many similarities, and it's very interesting. The way you work is very, it's what a lot of us should be doing as business owners, but it's what a lot of us should do as software developers as well. So as a software developer, every once in a while we go, oh my gosh, we need somebody who's an expert at Unix, or we need to get somebody who's super checked out on Oracle financials because we need to integrate with it, or what have you. Do you find yourself, you're going in here, you're airlifting into the middle of a small business going, oh my God, I have this and this and this. We have an inventory problem, or we have a payroll problem, or do you find yourself kind of bringing in other partners? They need a software system. Well, guess what? You can talk to 50 people that you know about that. But do you find yourself bringing in other professionals to help support what your core agenda items are within an organization?
For sure. I spend a lot of my time networking with others and getting to know other a lot of the time C-level fractional people, so that when I go in and they're like, oh, my QuickBooks is totally screwed up, I'm like, yeah, not my world. We are out of that, but here, call this person.
Yeah.
And so I have built referral relationships. That's actually one of the things. I think somebody said it the other day, and I don't remember where I was. They're like, oh, she knows everybody. I'm like, I don't think I know everybody, but I might know the right person. So, being able to pull those people in. I have a great marketing person that I work with. Finance is harder because it's so all over. It's, some people are big strategists, others are bookkeepers. So, it really depends on what you need there. We've brought in HR experts for things like writing policy manuals and that kind of thing. So if we identify it and it's not in our wheelhouse, we're going to recommend somebody that can come in and help with it.
Yeah, that's nice. When so we're talking about a lot of things, and you're giving us a good idea, fulfillment and the different areas that you touch on, some of the project management, some of the tools and so forth. When and when we, earlier, we were kind of just talking about most small businesses, some of the things, delegation and execution and measurement and accountability, you've kind of done a nice job of doing that. Do you find, one of the things that I know about you, oh my gosh, you've touched, number one, in full disclosure, Susan has helped us recently at our shop. She's fantastic, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But you've worked with, like you said, Sindelar, Scarpetta Group, and so forth. You've worked with probably about 15 or 20 FileMaker shops that many of us know by name. What do you see, without divulging, John and his crazy penchant for movies or whatever? What are some of the things that you see a real commonality within our community that you find yourself going, wow, a lot of the people in this community seem to need help here, and here?
So to be fair, I know John, but I have not worked for John. I got that from one of his DevCon presentations.
Yeah.
But I have worked with, I counted the other day, it's over 20 for sure. FileMaker shops. Consistently, what I have found is that most of you have started out as a great developer, and you kind of became a freelancer from there. I'm going to do my own thing. I'll sell my own thing. And because of it, so this is all mentality, really. Once you get into your business, you're trying to kind of tackle it like a software developer. And you're not taking the step back to look at the big picture of business. You believe you can fix everything because you're capable of building software that fixes everything. But you're not looking at, okay, I might not be an expert in accounting, and maybe I need a bookkeeper. Or some of you have worked yourselves to death and you're nonstop working. And, maybe you have some family members that might like to have dinner with you, or kids that might like to see you at their soccer games. And so that's another area where we really focus, and not just FileMaker world. I mean, all of these things happen everywhere. It's
right.
Not just FileMaker. We want to focus on that business owner and what are you doing every day, and putting a list of, okay, this is a list of all the things that I do every day. Okay, great. How much would you pay somebody to do these things? Is it a $10 an hour task, or is it a $200 an hour task? So with FileMaker developers, I think especially, they've not stepped back to think about that. They've just dug in and decided they can get the work done. And that's where you grow, is when you take the step back.
Yeah. I did a session at a DevCon a couple of years ago where I talk about, growing your shop. And one of the metaphors I used was, when you're a solo developer, you're a kayak, you're one person and you control all the rowing, right? The start, stop, you can turn on a dime, you can do whatever you want. once you get a team of people, it's like being in, you're in a full rowing situation. You're really just the coxswain, just sitting there saying stroke, 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 and everybody else is providing the momentum. And you can't stop and start and turn on a dime as much. You've got more power and you can move faster in a straight line. But you go from being sort of a speedboat to more of an ocean liner, and learning that you being at the oars is not necessarily the best place for you. That developer headset that you put on and go, I can develop this, is not necessarily the right approach. As you have people who can develop and other things, you need to be focused on, cash flow and marketing and communications with your customers and future technologies and all those types of things. So you can't do that. I always tell people, if you're below decks rowing, you can't be up on the deck of the ship, steering. You need people to do both of those. And many of us started organically in the trenches as a developer, and that's hard to make. And that goes for whether you're a cabinet maker, a baker, or a FileMaker developer. You get to a certain size, and it's the craft of what you guys do is being done by other people, and somebody needs to steer, and that's a hard adjustment sometimes.
And if you're a business owner who wants to develop, that's where your passion is, well, then you need another setup, and then make sure you're carving out time every week that you are going to develop. But I would also suggest you shouldn't be the one working on a deadline. You need to be developing some back-end systems that your team can take and run with, or a product if you sell a product, those kinds of things, so that you can continue to stretch your wings and do those things that you love, but not impact your team and your clients by missing deadlines because somebody pulled you out off your thing to go do something else.
You are preaching to the choir. My team, there are very few times, but my team, on very few occasions, everybody's busy, a new customer, and I go, okay, well, I'll start this, and everybody's like, no, and they throw themselves, no, I'll divorce my wife and move into the office, but let's not give Dave another project. And to that point, I do work on internal things that have no deadline, and I can work on those slowly. But that's a really good point. That's a really, really good point. I've learned that through hard knocks, but you're hopefully saving other people some blows by calling that out early, right?
Absolutely. I think it's really important to, as the owner, to decide what is my passion and how do I keep doing that without doing the other. And I also think it's interesting that over time, most of the owners have evolved away from the coding. Just like I started my business thinking, oh, I'll just be a project manager. Okay, yeah, but that's now all I'm doing. I can't do anything else if I'm managing projects for 5-10 people. I'm just glued to my chair all day. I'm not doing the things to grow a business.
Right. You've mentioned some of the tools that you used, obviously teamwork. If I'm not mistaken, you and I have talked about this. You've done, you became like teamwork certified or something like that, but you're like pretty deep in their community as well. Is that correct?
They're actually, outside of word of mouth, my #1 referral partner.
Wow.
Yeah, teamwork. I found the tool early on in my Beyond the Chaos years, and I'm like, this is amazing. It does all the things. And I sought them out. I had sought out Basecamp actually earlier because I'm a big fan of Basecamp, especially if you're entry level into project management.
Right.
And I sought them out, and I'm like, what kind of partnership type environment do you have? And they don't have one, and they don't want one. Basecamp is a very interesting company. I do like how they are who they are, and they make no excuses for it. So I'm like, okay, well then I ran into teamwork, and I'm like, this does so much more. It's Basecamp on steroids, and it pulls in, it eliminates the need for several other tools to get what you need to get done. And so I reached out to them, and they're like, oh yeah, here's a test. You take a test. It was a ridiculous test thing. And it turns out that originally they had said that they gave you the test based on support questions that had come in. So there were all these things that you're like, what? I mean, you guys probably have that experience on the FileMaker test, but I managed to pass it and became a partner because I love the tool so much.
Wow.
And my team now, I mean, we run on it. When I hire people, we train them on it. Now, we'll work in whatever tool you have, whether it's a homegrown FileMaker solution, which, by the way, I recommend you do not create. If you have a product like that you're selling, then maybe you want to eat your own dog food, but do not just create something for your in-house. These tools that exist today, do what you need to do. Save your development time to go out and sell and use and make some money off of it instead. Otherwise, you're just going to have this tool that it's buggy and doesn't do what you need it to do, and you become a slave to it. But Teamwork, I'm on their website as a partner, and I think I'm one of the few that targets very small business. So I get a lot of referrals from that.
That's one of the other things too. When I said earlier, where do you find yourself working? And you said fulfillment. I like when somebody also says we do best when we're working with this size of work, not, oh, we work with anybody from 5 to 5 million. I think it's nice to know where you belong in that. Just full disclosure, again, recently, Susan worked with our team, just again, from now that we're in this hybrid environment where everybody's not in the same office, we've got a new office and I've got 1 or 2 people in the office at a time, but we still have a lot of remoteness to our business. And what are things that we can do to help improve the communication? And she was just fantastic at helping us, just kind of remind us of the things that we should be doing, giving us some new insights. One of the things that you also did was just kind of spearhead some new initiatives in terms of how we use Slack and how we can use it purposefully and not just reactively and so forth, which I thought was good. But my question to you, and again, this is not about us, I'm just trying to throw some light on the fact that you've helped us in an area that we haven't mentioned yet, which is like Slack and communications and so forth. What are some of the streamlining and takeaways? What are some, if you had to sit back and go, oh gosh, 4 years ago, we had this customer, they were a mess. And now what are some of your big successes that you would sit there and go, oh my God, this was such a fantastic win for us?
So years ago, we had a client that came in, they had a project that was a disaster. They had put all their team members in it, all eggs in one basket. It's huge. And it's going down the tubes. And they're like, can you please come fix it? I'm like, okay. So I jumped in and I looked at it. I'm like, look, this is not fixable. Nobody even knows what the deliverable is. So, we're like, we have to have a reset, and ain't nobody going to be happy here. The client's not going to be happy and you're not going to be happy, but they had gone down this road so far deep. There's really no way out for either party. So the client was going to have to pay more money. It was going to have to be on a discounted rate. And we were going to have to define what had to be executed for this to be complete. That was torturous. Meanwhile, nobody could even focus on other clients. So we got it ironed out and we got it happening. And then all of a sudden there's space for more clients and the money's turning around. And now that client, still a client of theirs, which is great. They managed to finish it and are now supporting it. And so that type of thing makes me so happy to see. Everybody involved had to go through these really rough waters together, but came out on the other side successful.
Nice.
So we can cite examples like that with other clients too. We recently worked with a financial digital agency, and man, the owner was not, he was working 70 hours a week. And to hear, and nobody knew what anybody was doing. I think I mentioned them earlier, but this, at the end of this engagement, the whole team's happy. They're like, we all know what to do and it's all in front of us. And the owner knew what was going on. And he was able to cut back his hours. So those types of things where we sometimes help save a family or somebody's
Quality of
sanity,
life. Yeah.
that's even better.
We love those. We're kind of coming near an end. I want to make sure that we point out this, and I also have, we'll talk about the slide in just a second, but I also have a question. Lynn Allen is asking, how has COVID and remote working affected your business?
Lynn, that's a great question. I'm virtual. I've been virtual since 2010. So that part didn't affect it at all. However, it made me realize that I knew something about virtual work and remote work that other people didn't know. And, you know, isn't that always interesting when you're like, oh, this stuff that I just know, somebody else doesn't have a clue about it. You guys probably run into that all the time. You just know this and you don't even realize it's marketable, right? So that's actually something that we were helping Dave with, is how do you take a team that was used to working in an office and expanding it to not always be here. I've been able to watch companies, because I'm in so many of these companies' Slack groups, right? I was in Proofs before Proof was Proofgeist. I'm in the Scarpettas. I'm in mine. I was in Mighty Datas. And what I find very interesting is how you can see the culture of these organizations by watching the communications in Slack. And it's very definitive, and it's very interesting to see how they're very different and how they're managing things very differently. So that I've been able to bring as, you know, an additional piece of value to the companies that we're working with, because they're all being affected by this now. And don't make any mistake about it, it's never going back. There's always going to be part of this moving forward, no matter what. The people saying, oh, can't wait till it gets back to normal, that ain't going to happen. So you're going to have to figure out how to attack that. So positively, that's how COVID affected my business. Negatively, you know, I had some clients that were really hard hit. So it was a rough year. We managed to maintain our revenue, but it was a rough year. We certainly did not grow.
We got another, I'm going to probably tie this off because we're going to start running long in a bit, but Heidi is asking, what do you mean by culture? What are some of the sort of, when you're talking about in Slack, what are some of the different cultures that you sort of see in a Slack feed?
Some of it is what is the value that the owners place on culture? So is everyone interacting in a friendly way and chatting like they would in a kitchen at lunch break? Are they supporting each other? Are they jumping in and saying, oh, you have to go because your kid's sick, I can take that over for you? Or are, you know, is it much more silent? Is it they only jump in when they need help, or they only share negative input or process changes only? You know, is it their water cooler tool, or is it their nothing but the facts, ma'am, you know, type communication tool? Yeah. It really tells you the personality of the owners there.
Yeah, I think the owner and the management team are really a part of what's permissive, what's encouraged, and what's permissive, and what is, you know, beyond the scope of that. And we, you know, internally, we try to keep different areas for, here's something silly and stupid and funny, and there's something that's pertinent to X, Y, or Z. Susan, you've done a fantastic job. Again, I think it's just always so inspiring to hear you talk about how you get into the guts of an organization and find problems and smooth them out and apply these processes and so forth. For everybody on the meeting today, these are, Susan offered these up to us. I think it's fantastic that she did so. The opportunity to get, you know, some insights into your own business and how she may or may not be able to help you with that. Also, I think she just posted in the chat.
Yep.
Yep.
Ladies
So a Heidi ho to you, and congrats on the success of your business. And thank you for imparting some of your wisdom with us. And I hope any number of you guys will consider reaching out to her if you have some things in your business that you feel are, rub spots or choke points or whatever. Because boy, she sure has. She's helped a lot of my friends. She's certainly helped Angel City Data, and she's got some really great insights. So thank you again for that.
Well, thanks for having me. This is really fun.
Oh yeah, it's fantastic. I'm so glad that you were a part of this.
And just on the side note, we start off all masked. We'd all been vaccinated, got negative COVID tests, and then outdoor, at some point we're like, okay, I guess I can take it off. So it's good to see people, fully in person. I mean, not fully, but face up. And it was just a mix of great content, but also just, I'd only been to one pause before. I went down to New Orleans a couple of years ago. And after all these years, I don't know, I guess I was busy having kids or something, but it's just so neat at pause. I used to love DevCons, but at pause, it's just so small that you get into, longer real conversations with people. And then the sessions themselves are, at least some of them are their presentations for a little bit, but then it's just a conversation, and people really are encouraged to pipe on in and even, pass the cords around and show their own screens and content. And so I won't come up with anything specific right now, but just overall, it was very, very good. Just coming back together of ideas and people. And both people, that we've known forever.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It is indeed Billy Idol. It is his latest EP.
Go ahead. Good to meet Jeremy.
Okay. And both people that we've known forever, or people that you may have seen certain people for years and never really had a conversation. And I think we all had a really good chance to get to know a lot of people better.
Nice.
Yeah, I felt like, everything Dina said, Pause on Air has always been everything that you described, I think, Dina, but this one was perhaps more acutely felt because we had all been so isolated for so long, and it was our first kind of breakout opportunity to really get to see people again and talk to them face to face and be in that group setting, but not too big of a group setting. The site itself was just amazing. I've never been to that part of the country, first of all, and got to visit a little bit in Asheville on my way there, and then which is a great town, beautiful, and then go to go from the Smoky Mountains to the Blue Ridge Mountains, and the Blue Ridge Mountains are just as smoky as the Smoky Mountains, but it was gorgeous country, and the camp was fantastic. The people who ran that camp were amazing. They were just so helpful and kind, and just really tapped into everyone's needs in a really big way. It was, they have their own waterfall, for God's sakes, and it's not just an insignificant waterfall. In California, it would be a national park built around it, but this was just somebody's little private waterfall. But it was just an amazing site. We had some interesting things happen, including a power outage that turns out, in the rain, in the dark, on a moonless night in Georgia, it is very, very dark. So luckily we all have flashlights in our pockets now, although they were not adequate for a lot of the kind of walking we had to do. Pretty rugged, lots of opportunities for exercise. As far as the sessions go, I went to a few. There's only so many at a Pause on Air, of course. There's not, it's not like DevCon where it's just jammed with sessions, but Maka had a kind of a fun UI session, and then of course a sort of pilot version of what we're going to see today from Wim and Chris and Heidi, which was terrifying, and you'll all be terrified probably by the end of this one today too. I'm just gonna throw that out there, and you should be. Something on Adobe Sign by Steve Lane that was also very interesting. That was rapidly taking notes, trying to compare it to DocuSign for reasons of recommending to customers and so forth. And also got some good conversations. I got a great little tip from an Apple engineer that I just happened to run into, a FileMaker engineer who works at Apple. I didn't get his name, but just things like that always happen at things like this, that you just can't replace, these little experiences, and also drank a lot of good whiskey. So there's a certain group of whiskey aficionados that are always going to show up at these things. And I'm happy to be included among them. And all around, left with a great feeling from that place and from the way it was run. And big props to everybody who put it on. I think they did a fantastic job, as I think has been true with probably just about every pause on air I've been to, which is a lot of them. So I'm a little bit different from Dina. I've been to many, although not all of them. If you've been to all of them, wow, good for you. I couldn't pull that off. But yeah, it's definitely worth the time and the money and the travel hassles and everything that went with it.
Nice. Wim, you were there. Anything to add?
I'll echo everything that was said. For me, it was my very first pause on air, weirdly enough, because typically I tend to send any of my staff because it's a friendly, smaller group. So it's a nice place for them to cut their teeth if they want to feel comfortable presenting something like that. It was a very nice reset. Like Dina said, it was a nice reset after almost 2 years in isolation to see how it felt to be back in a group and see how we interact, almost like relearning how we interact with people, right? So it was funny that way, the first half a day or so. There was a very nice contingent of Claris people there as well. So that was very interesting to catch up with them. So all in all, I thoroughly enjoyed it.
That's nice. I mean, to you, to both you and what Bob and Dina said, putting on an event of any kind is difficult. Doing it while there's still, the protocols around COVID and so forth, even more difficult. And then obviously weighing in the cabin fever that everybody's had and accumulated. Everybody's a little more, I think, just generally a bit more unpredictable and fragile and juxtaposed to where they're normally at. So it sounds like it was really a welcoming event and great for everybody to kind of mix it up again.
Yep, absolutely.
Anybody else have any other thoughts or takeaways from their experience with pause?
Yeah, I'll just add on to what Bob said, that the evening that there was a power outage that included all the cellular and Wi-Fi. So it was, what did they say? I don't know the kind of major line that they said had come down from a tree. Some fancy name I hadn't heard before.
It was actually a lightning strike hit a tree and it fell over and snapped a power pole in half. And so it was many hours before we had our power restored because of that. They worked all night to restore power.
Trunk line.
But the other thing is it waited till after our ransomware sessions. It was like an hour after our ransomware sessions that it happened. So
there was a little feeling of maybe boogeyman, sort of a little punctuation mark on your session, right?
Right.
So even though we were kind of already unplugged, except for the flashlight, there wasn't much going on the cell phones. So
pull out a pack of cards and get some poker going or something.
We did have jam sessions again. So that jam session was totally acoustic, of course. So made for a nice little gathering.
It was actually really nice because they had a power generator at the one building where they served us all of our meals, where we all kind of spent some time hanging out most evenings anyway. And so they have this long veranda with rocking chairs. I spent the evening up there just talking to a bunch of people and having a great time. But it was nice because everybody pretty much had no choice. It was either go to bed or hang out in this one place. And there went my earbud.
Can you guys still hear me? Anyway, it was great. It was kind of nice because everybody ended up in one place. It was more like a big party at that point. It was very cool.
We're going to have to, at some future Claris Engage, we're going to have to see if we can sneak into the power room of the hotel and with a couple of bolt cutters or something and take down the main line and see if we have the same kind of success. Well, thanks for that report. And again, if anybody there saw something that is, again, recyclable or reproducible here, let us know. Again, I'll just speak on behalf of the board that, we're always looking for great new content. Thank you, obviously, Susan, bringing some really interesting content to us today. And of course, I think the ominousness of the next session, which everybody has spoken about, I've heard a lot about through the trees and talking with Chris and Heidi about and so forth. But if anybody sees or hears anything there or has any inspirations, whatever, if you got any ideas for future sessions, we're always open and always willing to hear what you have and see if we can use it in the meeting. Without any further ado, Chris, I'm turning the floor to you and have at.
Okay, so let me try sharing my screen and then go into presentation mode and let's see how this works. So you guys should be able to see the screen now. And let me know if you see the deck. We good?
Looks
Yeah, it looks
good.
fun.
Yep.
Awesome. Okay, so a lot of you, I'm sure at this point, unless you've been under a rock, you've been hearing about ransomware. It's been all over the news for the last few years even. And, perhaps that has engendered some sanguinity on your part, maybe it's just noise at this point. And so the big reason that Heidi and Wim and I wanted to do this session is to convince you, if you need convincing, that this is a true multidimensional threat. It's been growing rapidly. You should prepare both yourselves and your clients accordingly. And in its essence, a ransomware attack is a crime of extortion. And so, most people just think, oh, they're going to lock up my machines or shut down my network and encrypt my data. But it's extortion across the board. Their goal is to apply pressure to you to make you pay them money. And so, yes, they will lock up your network. They will lock down your data, but they will also exfiltrate your data. So they'll suck your database up, which means that everybody should be using encryption at rest, assuming that someone will get their hands on a database and try and crack it open. If they do exfiltrate your data and they can get a hold of your customer list, they will contact your customer and say, hey, I just compromised this company that you work with, and I'm going to publish all your data unless you talk them into paying the ransom. So they will apply multiple pressure points on you to get you to succumb to them and cough up the ransom. So you need to be worried, don't take this lying down. We have a whole bunch of suggestions about things that you should do. None of these are going to guarantee your safety, but it's not just belt and suspenders anymore. It's belt and suspenders and a moat and a dragon and anything else you can rig up to slow them down. It seems like everybody we've talked to has a story. So some of you are definitely going to get hit. And the goal is to get back up as fast as possible. And on that encouraging, cheery note, Heidi's going to kick things off. Heidi, you're muted.
Yep, I had some technical difficulties. But so how this started was Chris and I in 2016 had a client get ransomware, and we were able to save the day because we had a recent backup. They didn't pay the ransom, which is a good thing not to have to pay the ransom, although often you do. And we decided we wanted to go to DEF CON, the cybersecurity conference in Las Vegas. And it so happened in 2017 that DevCon in Phoenix ended the day before DEF CON in Las Vegas was starting. And so we were able to do those trips together, and everybody thought we were crazy for going there. And I talked a little bit about this at a DEF CON recap that we talked about. And so this year we went, they also had similar requirements of vaxxed and masked. And this year, almost every single session talked about ransomware. And I think it was at that point we decided, hey, this would be a good pause on air session, because I'm pretty sure we knew it was happening at that point. And so we started talking to people about, hey, what do you think about us doing this session? And, so we talked about it on an FM bug meeting, and, Wim, because he loves messing with servers and taking them down, said, hey, I want to help. I want to simulate a ransomware. And so that's how, and then Gary, who's part of FM Bug or runs FM Bug, said he had an experience. And that was pretty much what happened all along the way. Was every time we talked to someone, someone had an experience. And so we're curious, how many people here have, a client, or I guess you could just raise your hands on the Zoom here, or know of someone who's been ransomware, because it's pretty common these days. I can't see any hands, so we'll just go on.
Lots of hands.
Okay, I can't see them on my other machine. So anyways, responding to ransomware is a team effort. So it kind of makes sense that, we have this 3-person team. Your ransomware team recovery team would be larger than that. And so this has really been a team effort, kind of doing the research, Wim, taking down the server, looking at possible prevention remedies. And we've really focused on FileMaker server. There's a whole, and that's what we see at DEF CON, there's a whole wider area of security that, nobody can keep up with everything. But we're going to focus on FileMaker server here. And if you think this can't happen to you, can you flip the screen, Chris?
Yes.
You're 2 screens up.
Oops, sorry.
So I'm not going to read off these statistics or numbers, but you can get an idea of them. And one of the things, people often think is, oh, this can't happen to me, because they hear about things like the Colonial Pipeline getting hacked, and some of these larger organizations being taken down. But the thing is that the Colonial Pipeline in particular was actually a vetting miss by the ransomware company. They did not qualify or vet their person they were attacking or company they were attacking, and they themselves said that they don't want an organization that can bring the full heat of the government on them for attacking an infrastructure. They made a mistake. And the truth of the matter is that the sweet spot for ransomware organizations is the same sweet spot for FileMaker organizations. It's small and medium businesses, governments, hospitals, people that, need their systems to keep up and running and are not going to bring a lot of heat. We talked in our breakout room a little bit about, it's good to know that they're tracking some of these ransomware gangs down. That probably doesn't happen in a lot of cases. One of the reasons is because a lot of this goes underreported. There's reputational damage, shame, etc. People did tell us about experiences, but in most cases, you're never going to hear about this stuff in the news. And then the other thing that we heard about this year at DEF CON was just, there's one slide we had in our DEF CON recap. This is a great business model, these ransomware companies. They have a stellar business model in terms of return on investment. And they're out there, and I know someone on this meetup today actually who has gotten propositioned on the dark web. Pass this on to your clients. Any disgruntled employee can just go out and get some ransomware and attack the company. I don't know what the new name will be instead of going postal, but it's really rampant, and it's a good business model, and it's not something to think won't happen to you. So anything else scary I missed, Chris?
I just would call out that third bullet because that was one of the questions we got at Pause on Air. It's like, so if you pay the ransom, does that mean you're good forever? And the answer is 80% of people who paid the ransom got hit again. It's like, they know you're good at it. So let's go back to the well and get these guys again. So paying the ransom is not a panacea for making sure that you don't get hit again.
Yep.
Yep,
So-
it definitely is like Heidi said. It's for the attackers. It's a very low risk, high yield kind of proposition, right? And as Stephen Blackwell often quotes, the forces of evil are well funded, and they fund themselves through these kinds of attacks, right? So these attacks are very, very sophisticated. And this particular graphic here is from Gartner. And what I want to show you with that is that the act of being encrypted, the actual visible part of the ransomware attack, where you get locked out of your computers and all your files get encrypted, that's really just the tail end of the attack, right? The attack actually begins way, way sooner, and can take months and weeks to gather enough information. And at the end there, I'll do the ransomware simulation, and you'll see all the stuff that they'll collect and where they then apply that in the actual attack that ends up encrypting all your files. But it's a very prolonged attack across multiple dimensions, as Chris mentioned, and multiple facets. Very often it'll start with some kind of phishing, right? They'll try to collect information about who you are, your staff, your environment. So there's a bunch of reconnaissance that happens at the beginning. And then they'll try to exploit one of many compromises to get something, to get them inside your network, inside your computers. Once they're in, they'll start to a couple of things. They'll try to burrow down further into what else you have. If they can access to a server and that server has a map drive, they'll jump across that to other servers. So they'll burrow down deeper and wider and spread themselves, what they call tunneling and burrowing there. And then once they're satisfied that they have enough information to warrant an attack, then the control center, because all of this information gets sent up to a control center, right? So think of it almost like if you have a little bit of experience with things like Zabbix server, something like that. So your machines that will get compromised will have a small thing, an agent that really doesn't do much except it listens to instructions from the command and control center. The command and control center will then say, "Yep, time to pull the trigger," and go ahead and encrypt your files and show that lock screen there to tell you that you've been compromised. But it's a very prolonged attack. I'll show you one thing there. Go ahead and switch to the next slide there, Chris. I can show you this in a little more detail when I show you the attack. This is from MITRE. And MITRE is a non-for-profit organization that does a lot of government-funded research. They have a great database called the Attack Matrix. And it shows, it's a nice collection of every step along that way of the compromise, going from trying to get information to exploitation, trying to get onto computers, elevate privileges. The middle column there, and it's a little small, but you can see the number of attack vectors that they have in the middle column. They will go to great length to try and hide themselves. And not just hide themselves, but to very actively defeat all of the defenses that you have, right? Disable your anti-malware, disable your antivirus, disable your monitoring. If you looked at this website for real, you can see that middle column where they try to obfuscate themselves, it's actually the longest, right? They will spend the most efforts right there in trying to make you believe that they're not there before they actually go on to the attack. So this is a great resource to just go and read for a bit and go across all of these attack vectors and reflect a little bit for yourself, your organization, and your clients to say, am I at risk at any of those? And then you can use them to, in a somewhat targeted way, try and come up with reasonable defenses along all of those. So it's a great way to actually see, and this is the scary part, to see how many tools there are available to them to get to that final attack that will encrypt your files.
So this is something, if you fire up a Tor browser, you can find a lot of these guys. But one thing that I guess is super concerning is the professionalization of ransomware gangs over the last few years. They've been growing by leaps and bounds. They have millions and millions of dollars coming at them. They can afford to continuously improve their tool set, Back in the day, it used to be that this was primarily a Windows problem and you almost never saw Mac or Linux efforts. And, that is no longer the case. I was watching, I'm on all these lists now with these security vendors, and I think it was Acronis who said they do email monitoring, and they basically intercept all your email and scrub the bad stuff out of it. And they said just in the month of September, they saw like a 27% increase in malware that was specifically targeted at Macs. And so this stuff is coming on pretty recently, pretty fast. And so it used to be that you could sort of rely on the fact, oh, I got my FileMaker server sitting on a Mac, I'm probably safe. And, a year or two ago, that was probably true, but I don't think that's true anymore. So you can't really rely on the fact that, you've been doing this for years, you've had it sitting on a Mac, you haven't gotten hit. That is no guarantee of, future impunity. You will probably get hit. But this whole professionalization thing, they're like regular software companies. They're advertising the features, look how great our stuff is. If I go here, here's how effective we are. Here's some leaked data. They have little timers running on the people they've compromised who they're waiting to get a ransom from. And if the ransom isn't paid, then bang, they're going to publish their data. So this is, they're not fooling around. They're like, and if you don't pay up, you can see other guinea pigs who messed around and see what happened to them. And then over on the right-hand side here is like, look how good we are compared to our competitor ransomware gangs. This is why you should go with us. And so they're actively recruiting disgruntled employees inside of companies. So you could do everything right. You could lock down your edge endpoints. You could have really robust anti-phishing campaigns. And then you get Joe in accounting who's ticked off for one reason or another. He's like, screw this, I'm out of here. And on the way, I'm going to drop a bomb on the network. And so all he has to do is roll up to one of these sites and sign up and bang, off you go. So it's scary that you could be doing, have perfect execution on your defense and still get compromised. So this is just a real quick, we did a quick show of hands at the beginning. There were a ton of hands. At pause, I would say at least half the people put their hands up as well. Everybody's been seeing this. One of the people we talked to at the FM bug user group, Gary Palmer, had one of his clients get hit. And, it's really hard to draw conclusions right now because everything's moving so fast. So he had his files on a Mac and that more or less kept them safe. Open database files have share locks on them. So the database itself might be, an encrypted copy still might be made, but because of the share lock, the database tends to, it's not a guarantee again, tends to stick around even after it's been encrypted. But if you have external storage turned on for container fields, that stuff's probably going to get encrypted. And then there are a bunch of questions that came up, especially in the wake of the 888 attack back in June. At first we thought, boy, it was lucky that this happened in the middle of the night. I think the attack happened at 2 a.m. But, if you're an attacker and you're trying not to be seen, that's exactly when you want to be doing your attack, is in the middle of the night, when it's going to take longer for the IT forces who are charged with defense to, get their act together and try and fight this and shut things down and unplug cables and stuff like that. Hard to do at 2 a.m. unless you're there. And so, the ideal timeframes for these guys is like 6 p.m. on a Friday on a 3-day weekend, or over the weekend, or in the middle of the night and stuff like that. So that tends to be the case. And so typically, if you have production databases, that tends to be when those databases are quiet. The cache is probably empty. Everything's been written to the database. And so there's a decent chance that if the thing gets encrypted and then decrypted, that you may be okay. But, anything short of that, if you have unwritten stuff sitting in the cache and the database gets locked up, it's probably going to be a mess when it gets decrypted, if it gets decrypted. And I think that's all I have on that. Wim, you look like you have a thought. So if you do, chime in.
Nope, good.
All right.
One of the things that we wanted to have a look at together with Heidi and Chris is do a little bit of research on what it would look like if a ransomware attack were to happen on a FileMaker server. What are the things that we would have to look out for? The things like some of the things that Chris mentioned. For instance, that when FileMaker server has a file open, has a lock on them, what does that mean? What does it mean if a file is paused? What does it mean to your remote container data, your backups, all of that good stuff? So we've been looking for a good ransomware simulation tool to help us do that. And when Heidi and Chris were at DEF CON with an F, not a V, in Las Vegas, there was one tool that got presented called Racketeer, and that's one that we'll be using. It's just like with anything else, just like with backups and restoring from a backup more than just the act of taking a backup. You want to be able to practice, right? You want to be able to see the effect of what it is to go to a restore procedure of one of your backups. Maybe you want to write a procedure for that so that you know exactly what to do when something like that happens. And we'll come back to that in a sec. Clearly, when you get hit by a ransomware attack, us as FileMaker developers, we tend to only have part of the responsibility for the deployment. We are not going to single-handedly turn this thing around when you get attacked, right? So the response to a ransomware attack is going to involve multiple people from multiple departments. And there's no way that you can do this off the cuff, right? You need to practice this. You need to think about what it takes. You need to also see what an attack looks like so that you can know what is that I should be looking for when to basically determine if an attack just happened or is happening. You'll hear us say that quite a bit during presentation like this one and the other one is you have to know your normal, right? You need to know exactly what your normal state of your deployment is so that you can detect the abnormal states, the anomalies, right? If you don't know what your normal state is, you have no chance to capture anything that is out of the ordinary. And with the use of these ransomware simulators, you can then test your defenses. For instance, you can try and detect whether there is some communication going on between that agent and the control and command center. Maybe you want to be able to detect whether an encryption process is going on, right? So all of that are things you can do with a decent ransomware simulator so that you can test your defenses and figure out if you can catch them when something happens.
Right. Wim, are you ready to do your demo?
I am, if you can give me control there of the screen. And that may be a David question. And Dave, can you make me a co-host for a bit?
Said you're the co-host now.
Looks like you did, yeah.
You should be, Win.
Oh, perfect, thanks. All right, so what I want to show you is a ransomware simulation, right? So I have my FileMaker server, it's an AWS box, Windows, as you can see. And nothing too weird is going on there. It's got a couple of files open. Remember that infographic that shows sort of like the life cycle of a ransomware attack? In order for a ransomware attack to happen, there's got to be something on your machine already, right? So your machine has to be compromised. And that will happen, like I said, weeks or months ahead of the actual encryption. In this case, the ransomware simulation Racketeer that I'm using has an agent. It also has the server component, and we'll get to that in a sec. But I have this agent on my Windows server, so I'll just kick it off. It's called the File Connector, innocuous name, it can be whatever it is. But my agent is now listening to see if there's a command and control center server to listen to. So of course, typically you wouldn't see that. I'm running it in debug mode, so you can actually see what's happening. So the agent is active, right? So the agent on my FileMaker server machine is running and is ready to accept some instructions. So I'll switch to a Linux server. And this Linux server is my control center, right? So I'll fire off my Racketeer. So this is the heart of the ransomware attack, right? So I'm sitting somewhere. Along the way, in the last couple of weeks and months, I've collected information about your deployments, about your network, about your passwords, all of that good stuff. So what I have now, I'm pretty confident that I have everything that I need. I'll basically have a look to see what kind of agents are active or pinging me, right? So I have this one agent, that's the agent that I just fired off on my Windows server. So I'll go ahead and activate this one. There we go. If I now do activate again, you'll see that my agent is now listed among the active ones. I'll send it the master key so that the agent knows that it's talking to the right control center, right? So that's just a little protection in the ransomware simulator so that nobody can use my agent. Only I can use my agents. So the agent is configured with a hash of my master key so that it knows it's me for real. So I'll send that off. And now my agent trusts me. So one of the things I can do, I can send that agent a little heartbeat. And there it is, right? So it says, hey, I'm running on this machine and my agent is running as this account name, right? So, and it happens to be an administrator account. And it's probably not too big of a stretch of an imagination that most of our FileMaker servers on Windows or even on Mac, we run those when we log into the admin console as full admin users on Windows, right? So that means that that agent that I just fired off is running as a full administrator on that Windows box, right? So next up, as me sitting here somewhere in Russia, probably, or in China with my Linux box as the command and control center, I will now execute a policy. That's what polexec means there. And I have on my Linux box a policy that is going to do the full encryption. Now, let me show you that policy for a sec. I should have opened this before. Connect to this one. And let me just quickly navigate to my policy so we can see what that is. Oh. That again. There's my policy. Now, the policy, that is where me as the attacker, I've collected all the information that I know about your deployment, right? So this is where I'm telling my agent, hey, you got to talk to me. That's my my control center here. Never mind this the communication. That's basically just the APIs that I have enabled on the agent so that I can do things like the heartbeats or get my logs or get a summary of where it is with the encryption process. Here's that hash of the master key that I mentioned, and this is the UUID of my agent. But it's in these sections, the hosts, the authentication, and then below here the files, that the really interesting stuff is, right? So I have harvested a bunch of information about your environment. I've collected a bunch of credentials. And if you want to know how I harvest those credentials, look at that MITRE attack matrix, right? So it shows some of the vulnerabilities and the attack vectors I can use to get to your accounts. But in this policy, I basically list everything, every credential that I think I will need to get to your machine. Not only get to your machine, but also get to any jump points I have off that machine, any map drives, any network shares, anything like that I can get to from the machine that I'm attacking. And then I will have one or more hosts that I will going to attack. In this case, I just have the one. That's the machine that my agent is running on. But I've configured it with a bunch of files and folders that will be very targeted, will be attacked in essence, right? So I have the default backups folder. I have the default database backup databases folder on my FileMaker server. And on this particular server, I have detected that there's an additional backup folder and an additional databases folder. So I've included those as well. And this is the encryption key that I will be using. Now note that this policy doesn't exist on the machine that I'm attacking, right? It only exists on my control machine. So I'll be sending it out in memory to my agent. So you will not detect that on your machine. So it doesn't exist until I'm ready to attack that server. Right, so that's that policy here. If I execute that one, I'll send it over. And what we'll see here is on that agent will now very actively begin to start encrypting all my files, right? So At some point, actually, let me go, because it does the backups first. Right, so this one is now already encrypted. Right, so it'll go to all of my backup files, go to my live files as well. So it'll basically go ahead and do everything that I told it to do. So you can see some of the live files already being encrypted here. Now, my agent, while it's doing this thing, my agent is programmed to detect whether FileMaker server has an open handle and skip them. That doesn't mean that your open files are safe for this kind of attack, right? It's actually very trivial because Microsoft has a command line tool called handle so that you can detect handles, but you can also kill the handles, right? So I can make a command line call to say, hey, I detect that this file is open and I see that FileMaker server has it open. I can do two things. I can just plain out kill the handle and make the operating system release the handle. That will make FileMaker server very unhappy. So it's very likely that your FileMaker server will crash when I do that. Or I can just, if I'm smart enough and I see that this is a FileMaker server, I can just tell the Windows service to shut down, right? Which, as we know, will close all the files. And I don't need a password for that, mind you. So that's something to think about, right? So if you shut down the service, the FileMaker server service, you don't get prompted for credentials to close all your files, right? So that's done, right? My attack is done. Everything is encrypted. What I would do next is I would tell the agent to go in unhide mode and display a message. Right. So if I go back to here, now I'm locked out of my FileMaker server, right? Or this machine is now no longer usable to you, right? This is the message that you'll get to say, hey, your machine has been encrypted and you're done, right? So you've lost control over this machine. And even if you got back control over your machine, your files are encrypted. There's nothing you can do about that. So at this point, you're in hope and prayer mode that you know what to do, that you have a procedure that you've practiced and know exactly what to do. If you end up paying my ransom, something that I can do, and I may not do that, right? So as Chris mentioned, and I think Heidi mentioned as well, even if you pay the ransom, there's no guarantee that your files will end up being decrypted, right? The attacker may just walk away with your money and leave you to it. But if I wanted to, I can just execute another policy. And of course, this being a ransomware simulator, you would want to have the ability to decrypt your files again, right? So I can send the decryption policy that will basically reverse that encryption and be done with that. So we don't need to wait for that one to happen. But that's how you can do a ransomware simulation on your FileMaker server. And it gives you all the moving pieces so that you can try and figure out what you can do to try and detect that. Can you detect the communication? Can you detect the act of your files being encrypted? Do you have any kind of monitoring happening on your FileMaker server so that you know that FileMaker still has the files open that it's supposed to have open? Are you detecting whether your service is even running? So there's a bunch of stuff that you can help detect by using one of these ransomware simulators and figure out what's going on.
So Dave, can you give control back to Chris?
I think I've got it. Let me go here. All right, can you see the deck again?
Yep.
All right, awesome. All right, Heidi.
So this is something we want to iterate from the beginning. Wim talked a little bit about it, was that, this is something you need to think ahead and make a plan for and figure out what roles and responsibilities you'll need to, delegate, make happen, have a plan for if something like this happens. And one of the things I wanted to mention at the beginning was that this is really relevant for, we had a client get their server blown away by a tornado, literally in Panama City, Florida. And a lot of these making the plans and the role and responsibilities, they can be adapted for any kind of, server machine going bad, et cetera. There's other reasons to do this not the least of which is ransomwares. And so, doing these things, making a plan, you'll make better decisions because you're calm. You'll be able to adapt better because you're calm. But one of the most important things is to find out problems you don't know about before they happen. We talked right before we were at pause, the Facebook outage happened, and they didn't know that they couldn't access their server rooms because their digital badges weren't working. You need to know where your passwords are, if you can, get access to various storage, if your IT systems are down. You need to not find out that you haven't done patches. And I put that number, I added that number 2 there because unpatched software is the number 2 attack vector of ransomware. Number 1 is phishing, number 3 is RDP and weak passwords, just in case you're wondering. And so the more you can minimize the panic by having a plan, having responsibilities. And when we talk about roles and responsibilities, it's probably things you haven't thought of, like someone has to call the authorities. Someone has to notify the customers if there's some critical needs there. Someone needs to be stopping the spread, unplug everything, all the routers, everything, stopping the spread of the ransomware actors that are in there. Go ahead. So this is the NIST cybersecurity framework. We went out and found this, and this also can help with just beyond ransomware in terms of identifying what you have, what you need to protect, what you need to do to protect it, the different protection areas. But also the big one that, another thing we want to stress is just the knowing your normal, and with ransomware, knowing your normal. And so, if there's some kind of anomaly or event that has a bad actor that's come in, or even non-ransomware, you're using up your disk space, et cetera, know your normal. So, if something bad or a bad actor has gotten in. And then the response and then the recovery. And so those would be part of your plan, is your response and then how you recover, how you bring your systems back up and how you communicate. And you see communications is a big part of respond and recover. And so having a plan really helps with that. So one of the most important things is, this protection of the databases. The unique thing about FileMaker Server, or maybe not the unique thing, but you're mainly protecting the database and the backup directories if you're trying to protect the attack surfaces. And again, we've kind of hammering this home of know your normal, what's your baseline, and so if something has happened. Some unexpected files, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the research we've done. And so you can get early alerts of different anomalous activity happening, like your processor activity, something's been disabled, your malware, maybe you had PowerShell running and or you had it turned off and something turned it back on. So that's the detection part there. Another part on the second column there, the immutable backups, and we're going to have a presentation about this. And I know Wim's done some presentations about backups at our meetup this month. That is, one of the most important things, because if you have, a recent backup, maybe you don't need to pay the ransomware, right? But then you need to, have a plan to bring everything back up, have your passwords, know what you don't know in terms of recovery and recover. And then, some of the recommendations, there's and Chris has put together a bunch of resources in terms of just all the areas of protection that you can take action on in terms of disabling scripts, disabling processes like PowerShell. I added this in about, anytime you're alerting, send it to a bunch of people because, one person might not see it. And then there's tools like application control programs, like on Windows, I think, what is that one called, Chris? Do you remember the app hacker? I was showing it to you yesterday.
There's a flavor of Windows Defender, I think.
Yeah,
application
Windows
Control, which will do it.
Yeah. Where it can tell you if there's new executables that have come aboard. When you start out, of course, it's going to see, it's going to notice all these things, and you'll have to say they're okay, people downloading whatever in an organization. And then, hardening protection around the 3 top attack vectors, which I mentioned on the last slide, because email and phishing is the top, according to something I just listened to yesterday, the top way that ransomware gets in. And we can talk a little bit more about that in the next slide. So this is some of the research we're starting to do, and we haven't, I guess the first one we haven't really looked at yet. And when I say we, Chris has tasked me with this, to see if we can prevent, the system privileges from reading and writing to database and backup. One thing I have looked at was just setting up a PowerShell script that detects if a new file is being created, because that's what the ransomware will do at the file level, and basically just send an email alert. And I did that in PowerShell, and then started, as we were doing our research, one of the, and it was on the last slide, one of the recommendations was, I don't have my video on, one of the recommendations was turn off PowerShell. And so I'm thinking, well, that's not really helpful to write a PowerShell script. But then Wim told me, well, ransomware people can turn back on, bad actors can turn PowerShell back on. So, that, it might still help out, because that is one way that on phishing is you can bring down a payload that uses PowerShell, and that is one attack process that they use. So, and then, so it is possible that, we could use something with PowerShell. The other idea was that we could use something rather obscure like Wimbatch or something like that, where we could detect a new file that's being created and then send off an alert. And then the second bullet here was just, detect and block any security changes, which I haven't got to looking at that one yet. But the other thing, and Wim was talking about this a bit with us at Pause, is, and we got this idea that, a lot of, actually made up this term at Pause called pro ransomware developer company and low ransomware developer company, where you have, people get what they pay for. So they have these ransomware companies that, they might not be as sophisticated. And then they have these really high level ransomware companies that they're down at the kernel level, right? And there's a tool called a rootkit, and you can search out there. I'd probably search on Tor or something like that, just so you don't look like a bad actor on a regular browser. But it's what malware uses to hide executables, so you can't see that there's malware on your computer. And so Chris had heard about this one called Rootkit 77, and I'm just going to show Chris or David, can you give me permissions to share? The one that's, I have my video on. Or David? Somebody?
Sorry.
I'm going to actually test your production chops and give me permissions on this computer, the one that I'm on the video here. And then I'm going to have you switch to the other one that's me as well. Because I don't have, yeah.
Did I get you?
Let's see. Yes. Can you see my screen with the rootkit here?
Got it.
Yep.
Okay. So this is called Rootkit 77. And basically it's going to hide by prefix files, directories. You can hide registry keys, services, etc. And so, you know, we talked about the fact that basically it's the backups in the database folder, right? That we want to protect. And so what this does is actually, it will hide this, and I'll give a quick demo of it if we have time. I think we have time. It'll hide the FileMaker server directory, but the FileMaker server process will still be able to see it. Because what it's hiding it from is any kind of enumeration like scene. And we haven't, I need to give the caveat of, we haven't, basically I'm gonna package this up and give it to Win so he can try it out and see whether it works. So we haven't tested it. We haven't put the ransomware and the hiding together yet. But if you can give me permission, I just wanted to show you it's pretty simple to set up. You once you get it compiled, I had to it had a Win32 part of it, and so I had to, you know, compile it, and the registry stuff you have to set up before you compile for hiding registry keys. But everything else, you're basically putting a basically a list of hidden paths, and I'll just show that in my demo. So I'm going to stop this share, and if you could give me permissions on the other machine, and I'll show it real quick. So I'm going to share this screen.
We're lousy with Heidi Porters on this meeting.
Yeah. Yep. All right. So, oh, now my VMware is going to take a while to start up. So yeah, that's the next step, is for me to give this to Wim and see if he can still hack the server.
While we're waiting, Heidi, can somebody pay Wim to go after a client who hasn't paid their bills or anything of that nature? Is that a service being offered?
Tempting.
Oh, you'll never believe what happened. My machine that I had pulled over here just ran out of power that I was going to show the rootkit on. But basically, you know, I showed you, you know, basically all you're going to do is you take, I'm just going to talk to it. You take the registry configuration and you put in a key that is hidden, and you say, you know, FileMaker server directory or backups directory, and then you inject a process on the test console. Here, I might get it back here in a second, and you won't be able to see that directory anymore. Would you take me away?
You want the football back?
So yeah, well, I mean, we'll show this at a different, maybe when we get it working together, we'll show it. I mean, it's not, you know, it's not any kind of big rocket science. All it does is, you know, you all of a sudden it just hides that that directory from the file manager, and you can hide it from dir, you can hide it from you know, any of your processes and all of your processes, and even your FileMaker server process. But your FileMaker server process, FMS admin, is going to know where it is, and so it's not going to stop anything theoretically from happening. So that's what I got to say about that. What's the next slide? So just to finish, I think, Chris, you already mentioned this about ransomware mostly being targeted at Windows systems. On our DEF CON recap, I referenced and showed a little bit about a talk called Gone Map Apple Picking, where he showed many hacks he was looking at. It was, I didn't go into all of them, on Mac OS. And so it's getting more prevalent. User phishing awareness training. This is so important. I know lots of FileMaker people are using KnowBe4. And I found a couple handouts. I think we could, I guess we'll post somewhere. For, people think they're never going to get caught by phishing, but some of the stuff I saw at DEF CON made me come back and not want to click on any links in the email. And I already said that the DEF CON recap, but it's worth repeating, that they are looking more and more real and more authentic. And, this phishing awareness training for clients and their users, we think is really, really important, as it's the #1 place that you get ransomware. And then for Mac OS, there's a tool called Ransomware. Chris, did you look at that one?
Yeah, I did. I
Yeah.
have it running, works well. Anytime, like I installed Acrobat the other day and it was trying to encrypt some little folder and this thing popped up and said, hey, this thing over here is trying to encrypt a folder. Do you want to let it do that? And so, if I would expect as ransomware gets more sophisticated, it will look for that and try and squash it before it tries to do any encrypting. But it's just a nice to have. It's not foolproof, but it's just great to see if anything's up to anything on your computer, it will halt the process and make you approve it before it lets it go through. And it's free. It's just a download from Objective-C. So totally worth it. It's absolutely worth the free cost.
And then I don't know if any or all of you have watched our DEF CON recap, but we talked a bit about event logging. And, we're happy to do that presentation again somewhere if someone wants us to, and just how important it is to increase. The quote from the guy, Malware Jake, who does incident response, said, oh, I have too many logs, said no incident responder anywhere. Because what he often finds is, Windows logs are at their default size of like 25 meg. There's, what they need logged isn't there. And so that's really important in terms of seeing what happens if something does get in. And also alerting if something, that's another thing we talked about in the DEF CON recap is you can, it's another thing about know your normal, and then alerting if something changes, if privileges are escalated, et cetera. So
one way to make sure that, a log hasn't rolled over and aged out basically due to sizes is to do some sort of log aggregation. And so if Zabbix can do this, but there are things like Splunk and New Relic can also do this. There are tons of tools out there for log aggregation. And so oftentimes, if you just look at the events on a single machine, it won't paint the same picture, the tunneling and burrowing that Wim was referring to earlier. Oftentimes you have to aggregate events that occur from like machine A hopping to machine B, hopping to machine C to really get the idea of what's going on. And so there's a bunch of, alphabet soup acronyms here. So one of the tools is a SIEM. It's a security information and event management system. This is great for log aggregation and sort of, you can have rubrics put together that says, hey, if I see event A and B and C in tandem, then I've probably got a problem. And so this is great for sort of analyzing across multiple logs and then triggering some sort of event. And then you could use that in tandem with something called a SOAR, which is a security orchestration, automation, and response tool. And there's a ton of things, the 40 client people who a lot of people have used for VPN access, they have a 40 SOAR. Palo Alto has Cortex XSOAR, Rapid7 has Insight Connect, IBM has one, Splunk has one, Nobi4 has PhishER. And then there's also the extended one, the XDR, Extended Detection Response, made by a lot of the usual suspects, McAfee, Symantec, Microsoft, FireEye. And these will get into if you have IoT devices, if you have a bunch of cloud services and stuff like that, if you have mobile devices on your network, this will sort of get to some of the more obscure sort of things. And so all these are great tools that you would want to use in a security operations center. So if you do get hit, one thing you should know, well, there's a bunch of things you should know, but one thing you should know is that a lot of these, if you're sort of lower on the food chain in terms of the ransomware actors, some of their stuff may be known, or maybe some script kiddies went out and grabbed something, just tried to deploy it to see what would happen. If you have some people who are not at the top of their game, you may have, some chance of using one of these ransomware decryptors. And again, a lot of the usual suspects have these. Avast, Kaspersky, people like that. You can just Google ransomware decryptors and you'll find a bunch of them. Give them a try. One thing that you should know, though, is that the US Treasury Department can sanction ransomware gangs. So that people who become a problem get on a Treasury sanction list. And that technically makes it illegal for you to pay their ransom. So you should absolutely notify three-letter agencies like the FBI if you do get hit, just to make sure you don't, accidentally fall afoul of that. And someone who might help you with negotiation or facilitating a payment could also be criminally liable and get sanctioned. And there was one other thought I had with that. It's gone now. I think that's all I had for that factoid. And so, the overall goal of this was for everybody to start thinking about, what would, tabletop exercise, what would happen if so-and-so's on vacation and they usually handle our cloud stuff, what do we do? If our password manager is on a machine that's been encrypted, can we still get to stuff? Where's our sort of secondary and tertiary options for getting at our infrastructure if everything is gotten locked down? And so having a simulator framework like Racketeer and actually running some of these things and saying, okay, you have a plan, let's test it and see if it works, So all of these are just some bullet points, and we could have a whole discussion about all this stuff and the merits and the order of priorities. And I think communication is huge. You should probably notify your cyber liability insurance carrier right off the bat. They may want to drive point on this and say, you know what, we're driving the bus. We'll talk about paying ransoms or not and figure it out. Some of this may be out of your hands. And so figuring out who you should notify in what order, probably your legal counsel, maybe your customers, all that stuff needs to be worked out. And so a lot of this is not technical information at all. It's going to be kind of a policy and procedure kind of conversation that you should absolutely have with, the highest authorized people in an organization. So all this is good stuff to get into. And as you get into it, anybody who may be thinking, oh, we don't need to worry about this stuff, or we have insurance for that or whatever, as you get into this, it starts to put the fear of God into people, and you'll start to get a lot more buy-in to get whatever tools and processes in place that need to be put in place. This is a list of additional resources, and we could certainly paste this into the chat. Heidi mentioned the know before phishing awareness stuff, so we can paste all this stuff in here. And one thing I wanted to mention, this is sort of a recent development over the last week or two, is that in the wake of the Colonial Pipeline attack, there seemed to be a lot more energy coming out of the US Cyber Command. And at the end of October, I noticed this tweet thing about the ransomware gangs are freaking out. Their servers are getting seized. Their Bitcoin wallets are getting seized. Just a couple of days ago, on the 8th, the news came out that several REvil ransomware affiliates got seized. I think one in Poland, one in the Ukraine. They've seized their stuff. If you go to a website called bleepingcomputer.com, it seems to have a lot of good security news and stuff like this. So if you want to keep tabs on it, but it felt like, from the outside looking in, that for years, these ransomware gangs were operating with a lot of impunity. And it seemed like they finally stepped on enough toes this summer that they've started suffering some real consequences. So maybe the threat will tamp down a little bit. I wouldn't hold my breath, but it certainly seems encouraging that, nation states, this is requiring international cooperation to seize some of these people and extradite some of these people, that the attention to the problem certainly seems to be increasing. And I think that's great. So that is the end of our deck.
So I don't see, now you've made people less scared.
You think I ended on a bad note?
Yeah, because the thing is that from what I see, Yes, so they went after those people, right? But they don't have a ton of resources. It's a great business model for people. These ransomware companies are agile, like the real word of the meeting, agile. They're basically ramping up all the different ways that they can make money on this because it's a moneymaker. And so I mean, that's great that there's high profile action being taken against one group, but I don't think that that's
No, I get it. I mean, it's a drop in the bucket, but
Yeah.
it's starting to make it look slightly less attractive as a business model. But you're right. I mean, the exposure is low, the payoff is huge, the time to revenue is very fast, a matter of days. Typically, you like bomb somebody and poof, 3 days later you got bazillions of dollars. So it certainly is attractive to people who don't have much to lose.
Yep. And
Question,
in,
guys.
and in closing, from my part, a lot of the best practices that we've been talking about in the FileMaker space for many years apply with a vengeance to this kind of thing, right? And I don't think we've said it, but I think it's kind of obvious, is that convenience is your worst enemy here. Like for instance, that Windows FileMaker server box that I just RDP'd into, I'm running it as administrator. I have some local drives mapped from my Mac here locally to that AWS machine. That's the kind of stuff that from a habits point of view, we should try to avoid, right? Because what if that machine was under attack and the harvesting stage, right? Because now there's a mount points from that machine to my local machine, right? I've just provided them with a jump points to not only affect my AWS machine, but also attack my home office here, right? So it's these kinds of things that we need to think about. I just wanted to inject some more scariness there.
Yeah. So usability is the enemy of security, right?
It's a slider, right? You go convenience, or it's I close my door, I don't lock it at night. But now that it's so easy to break in, I got to start I've got to start implementing procedures. And I think what you guys are saying, many of the things that you are promoting are things that we should be doing all along in general. They're just impacted more because guess what? I should lock my doors at night, but guess what? There's a rash of burglaries. I need to be very vigilant about it and give a lot more thought to it because of its widespread escalation.
Yep, exactly. And because of the business model that we talked about, it's very high yield for somebody to try and see if they can get in. Any speed bump that you can throw in their way may be enough to say, you know what, it's not worth it. It's much easier to go and attack the other guy, right? So Chris and Heidi mentioned it a couple of times. There's really no foolproof set of defenses against this, but you can make it harder, and then hopefully hard enough that they'll say, this is too much effort for what it's worth. Yeah,
it's like your house with the barking dog versus
I got a German Shepherd inside the door. Let's go to the next house, right? It doesn't mean I can't, get past the German Shepherd some way if I really want to, but there are easier targets. Let's move on.
Yeah, I think the two most important things that everybody should be doing is turning on encryption at rest. So if your database gets exfiltrated, they won't be able to use, password or something to break into it. And the other thing is to use immutable cloud backups. And so if you have that, your backups, for those of you who aren't familiar with immutability, they're non-editable basically. And so if you have an immutable backup, then that can't be in turn encrypted. And so you would be able to recover from this. So that gives you, it sort of cuts off the exfiltration risk of getting publicly shamed and having your data published, and obviously there could be other things. They could attack a file server and get a bunch of goodies off of that. But as far as what we generally have in our wheelhouse, if you want to make sure that there are no leaks from the database, then you got to use encryption at rest. And then the immutable backups gives you some resiliency if you do get compromised, that you have some ability to recover from it. And so, we can't take care of everything. It's not our responsibility to take care of everything. Usually it's either the IT department or some managed service provider who's going to be responsible for this stuff. But for our corner of the IT ecosystem there, we should certainly make sure that we have good practices where, we're touching stuff.
Well, and one other thing to add that we didn't have on there about the immutable backups is, as part of your plan and your IT plans, you should be checking the backups, right? How many times have people, went to look at backups and they weren't there or good or something? There should be a process once a month, once a week to check the backups.
One other thing to consider, because all the security has costs and sometimes it's hard to sell it to your customers, is to talk to them about, there's a term in security, mean time to recovery. So if you had stuff, a separate system or remote backup or something like that, how long it would take you to recover and how much is the customer's cost. We even do it per hour for customers. And I said before in another presentation, we have a law firm and they say if they're down for an hour, it's $3,000 an hour. So it wasn't hard to sell them, a backup server for $10,000 that was ready to go. And that's where the backups go. And so we could get them up and running, knock on wood, as fast as 15 minutes. But the problem is with security, sometimes you can't get people to write a check to implement the security without, giving them some ROI on it. And that's the thing, if you come in and say you got to pay $5,000 to run some phishing stuff, to run some webinars, to fix your backup so they're remote, there's still way too many people that don't have remote backups. And it's an easy exercise usually to just say, how much is your time worth? How much would it be if your company was down? And sometimes some companies it wouldn't matter, but you get, all these companies with Facebook down before they said they were losing, $3,000-4,000 an hour in sales. So.
Yeah, your point, Dwayne, about some people still won't pay. We have had, a handful of customers over the years have these kinds of situations where once the dust settled, it was ironic, Chris's point earlier, I thought was really astute, where, 80% of people who have been tagged are high targets to be tagged again. We've had customers who have absolutely gotten hit. And our recommendations are, let's pay to do X, Y, and Z. And many of them are some of the things you guys are recommending here. And they're like, no, I think we're probably okay now that we got back up. And you're just like, your house got robbed. Let's get a deadbolt and an alarm system in place. And no, I think they won't come back. And I'm like, man, oh man, that's just juggling with knives right there.
Well, it's similar to insurance on something, and definitely have them check to make sure they've got cyber security insurance, because we always talk to people, we do managed services for IT, and we say we do not recover restoring of the data, the costs of setting up a new server, but your cyber insurance would cover that. So,
right.
Yeah. The point
amen,
about
amen to all of this.
Mr. Blackwell,
the best practices that people like Wim and Chris and Heidi and others have been advocating for years, as I believe Chris said, apply in spades to this. It's the old axiom, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me.
I noticed Steve's comment in the chat about performing a fire drill where you test your backup files. But the great thing these days is that there are deployment automation tools. You could use something like Auto to say, hey, go, fire up this new server here, put it up in the cloud, go grab this backup, try and deploy it, and have all that be automated so that you can actually have an automated process, test your backup to make sure it's viable and will come up without you having to remember to have a human being physically go, okay, go get the backup, open it up, try and make sure it, opens without corruption, et cetera, et cetera. This can be an automated task these days. And so to the extent that that's necessary, you should absolutely be doing something like that and make it an automated process so it doesn't get missed.
Yeah, and there was another point, a Wim or his bot, because this one has a last name in Discord, has been answering these questions here. But The question about, can your attacks find their way to your backup services like Dropbox and iCloud? Well, Dropbox is usually mapped to your drive, right? And so it can easily get there. And Wim already answered that, but I just wanted to call that out.
Well, this is, again, equally parts sobering, scaring, and also informative, but also with some really good tangible kind of things that we can do and some takeaway. The other thing, pardon me?
I'm sorry, Dave, do we have time for a question or two?
Oh, sure. Continue, go, Steve.
You guys did that thing where you mentioned something utterly terrifying and then just go on blithely and kind of leave the rest of us going, what? And maybe I missed it if you talked about it, but in terms of exfiltration and FileMaker file security and how they're picking up those passwords and which passwords we're talking about. Are we talking about FileMaker file passwords? Are we talking about admin passwords on the server machines? How are they getting into these files? Is there a file level thing we can do to make things harder for them, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, that's what the whole point of encryption at rest is. If you just take a regular FileMaker database, secure it, and then go up to Passware and get their FileMaker cracker, it'll just strip the password right out, and all of a sudden you have an admin account with no password and you can jump right into it. And so, yes, they would have to have some knowledge about FileMaker databases to be able to do that, but someone could figure it out. If you put encryption at rest on, that doesn't work. So you have to have the encryption at rest password to get in there. So to me, that is the single most important and relatively straightforward action you could take in the wake of this thing is to do that and make sure that even if the database gets stolen, that they can't break into it, because absent that, they can break in.
Yep, and also keep in mind that these attacks are a prolonged effort, right? So it's almost like reading a book for them, right? So once they get in, they go to great lengths to hide themselves, and after that they go to everything. Like how many of us don't have some sort of password in a text file somewhere, right? So you have to assume that all of these things are being read and captured, right? So they take all of that stuff offline, they read it, they go through it. And they collect a bunch of information that they find, like your list of map drives, any passwords that were stored, any FileMaker files that auto-open, all of that stuff, right? So it's all of these things that they have plenty of time to figure out long before they do the actual attack.
Yeah, and this was Chris got the idea about the rootkit because we were talking about, well, they can't encrypt the open database file, but Wim was talking about they could take it down. There's all kinds of things sophisticated ransomware actors can do. But Chris's idea for the rootkit was because use the enemies, they use it to hide their malware, use the enemy's tools for good, that whole kind of thing. But the second point I wanted to make was, Wim's talking about how they can get in and, get whatever you have there. And that's part of the recovery plan, right? Is you got to change all your passwords. You have to, anything that's in there, and, if you have anything credit card oriented, anything that's on there, you need to assume that it has been compromised. And so that's also something about, it's not really know your normal, but it's know what you don't know what's going to be compromised or can be compromised so that you can change that information and update it if you are compromised, right?
Totally, that all makes sense. And Chris, to your point about the encrypt at rest, I guess what I was thinking was sort of a belts and suspenders. What else can we throw in their way? And I guess to your point about passware, it doesn't matter whatever we throw in their way before they get the file, because that may not be relevant. Thank you. Yeah.
One thing I want to suggest, I think Heidi, Chris, I don't know if you guys are actually on our FMDiSC chat group. Wim is. but let's get you added. And now you're a part of our little email chat group, which is pretty active. And it's all these people in front of you, plus several hundred more. But it'd be great actually to get, you had a lot of links, a lot of resources in those slides that trying to handwrite
Yeah, let
those
me
out
paste
of.
those in.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to, pull those off of a YouTube video or have you guys throw everything into a chat here that's going to destroy in just a few minutes.